The first review or discussion I found of the movie The Shape of Water, directed by Guillermo del Toro, had some startling omissions as I saw it. The commentator called it normalizing Nephilim, which I guess is close to how I'd interpret it, but not the best fit. I see it as an Edenic story, and I found this remarkably absent from anyone else's discussion. I looked through, I think, at least 7 different most easily to find analyses of it, and haven't found that so far, despite the fact that all of Guillermo del Toro's movies have some sort of devil-type character in the main role, like Hellboy or Pan's Labyrinth and so on. In this case, it's the serpent, more originally known from the Sumerian myths as Enki, the god of water, and wisdom and fertility and magic and other things. Practically all the things that happen in Genesis around Yahweh, or some called him Baal or the Lord, have to do with rearranging things that Enki did in the Sumerian myths, which included making mankind out of clay, saving men from the flood, impregnating an earth goddess and all of her descendants, and healing, making someone young again in the case of Job, copying the Sumerian act that occurs in the movie, or the river god's act of giving a man his hair back. These are all things which are attributed to Enki and are rearranged in the biblical story, and commented on quite ironically in some ways in the movie, because the bad guy says that we're made in our Lord's image. A very strange thing to say, when the Bible actually says we're made in God's image. And if you check my other videos, God and the Lord don't always act exactly the same way. Here, the image of the Lord is two-part in Genesis 2. He's split into two. Enki does both the things that the serpent does, seducing the woman, being as a friend to mankind in one way, although not helping them achieve immortality, and even thwarting them from it, and also creating them, making them out of the dirt. So we got these two things that Enki did, split into two different apparent characters, although they seem to in the end work toward the same purposes, because one seduces Eve and the other one gives her the child. That's the serpent and Yahweh, Baal, respectively. So we have this splitting up and confusion of who the people are, and the villain of the movie misidentifies his own god as the enemy, because his own god plays these different roles. This gives us the beauty in the beast being identified with the serpent, as who was a beast of a form. And we have the theme of the monster is us, which I've alluded to in my past 2 videos, where people don't quite accept what is within themselves and externalize it onto others around them, exaggerating the apparent differences of others which are actually within themselves. The word asset is used quite strangely and interestingly in the movie. A CIA person who acts as the eyes and ears of the agency and forwards information to them is called an asset. So the creature in the movie is treated like a spy. He's fought over by different factions, including different nations, for his presumed knowledge, when, if he's working as a true asset, he's there just to gather knowledge. He's there to watch and then report back to other people if that were his true job, like the way intelligence service people operate. So he doesn't have to actually have the knowledge they're looking for. He's treated like the tree of knowledge, having something they want in that respect, when in reality he's more like the tree of life in that he can provide healing. And he's valued for one and almost destroyed when he really could offer the other, and people don't tend to see it. Another interesting theme of the whole thing is the voicelessness, and this is biblical, and something I've touched on many times in one way or another in previous videos, in that the book of Genesis is partly voiceless. It's not an ideal creation in the beginning, at least the part that we can observe, because no one sings. The gods don't even sing, much like the creature and his love interest in the movie are both silent. They are not shown in the biblical equivalent as being even interested in singing until the book of Exodus, when the Israelites are led out of Egypt. And there's no mention of singing's part in the creation until the book of Job, the only book where a man is made young again. So singing and rejuvenation are connected with each other in that book. They both come up in the same book. And they come up in the movie where the possibility of singing does not arise until after the woman has been healed. She plays the part of Eve, although she plays it in a more, both Biblical and Sumerian way, in different ways. She's voiceless because she doesn't know who she is in the biblical case. She doesn't know she's a goddess until she is renamed Eve and called the mother of all living. Like Ninhursag, her Sumerian equivalent, is called a mother goddess. And this is the one who's seduced by Enki. There's a form of experimentation that goes on in that the creature's treated like an alien and abducted, and that gives him these connotations of something possibly extraterrestrial in a potentially threatening way. And he's, however, does not give the woman in the story, who's called Eliza because of her inability to speak, which I've alluded to in my past video, and someone who has to learn to speak in a way, express herself and know who she is. Because in the biblical version, Eve finds out, as far as I can tell, and Adam acknowledges that she is a deity. He says, she is the mother of all living, and changes her name to reflect that. Whereas at the end of this movie, it's the villain man who says, you're a god, and he says it to the male, not the female. So despite all of the film's apparent discussion of civil rights and female emancipation, it doesn't seem to me to really bring as much power to the female character as the biblical story does to Eve. There's a theme of theft and the theft of fruit, partly like the theft of food in Pan's Labyrinth, in that the creature is the food, he is the tree of life. And he is stolen, and much of the movie is about how you manage to steal him. There's also a double meaning of the term asset, in that the woman doing the stealing is not seeing him as a physical love asset, not really so much for what he knows. So there's also a power exchange that goes on. It's almost a 50 Shades of Grey power exchange, except the woman starts out as being the one with the power, because her would-be lover is chained up or kept in very small bodies of water. His availability of water is very limited, and much like the Garden of Eden, because Enki waters the ground in the Sumerian equivalent of the Garden of Eden story by just having mist rise up. There's no rain yet, and this is the same thing that happens in the Garden of Eden. There's a limited water supply. It has to be irrigated, and this seems to show up in all the clips I've seen, at least, in the early stages of the movie. They have a very limited space of water, a volume of water, which the creature is allowed to occupy. So there's the theme of interacting through food, too. There's quite a bit of mention of eggs and playing with food, and the creature, in a way, symbolically being the food. So, yeah, I was quite surprised, really, that there's this abundant evidence of the theology involved. Now, some of it is Saturnine as well, too, in that you're dealing with time being a very obvious presence. Eliza is always at odds with time. She's late, like she is the last element of creation in the Bible, and even though she's supposedly the mother of all living, she hasn't known about it. She has to find out. She feels incomplete. She doesn't know who she is, or is allowed to speak it. So we have her always having trouble with being late for work and being locked up inside this area where time is important, and you can always sort of hear the clock ticking. She's also obsessed by water, and that is like the Ninhursag deity who falls in love with the water god in Babylonian, or I should say Sumerian mythos, which eventually became Babylonian and then Canaanite, and then found its way into the Hebrew Bible. So there are all these ways in which the Eden story, with elements of both biblical and Sumerian parts, is acted out. And a satanic or at least serpentine role is central to the movie, and yet, as far as I can see, is not really specifically identified by anyone else that I've seen so far. There was talk in one commentator's video about this being an example of Nephilim. But what you find in both of the fall descriptions in the Bible about people having inappropriate relationships with deities is that there's always a scapegoat character. In the first one, I think it seems to be Yahweh, Baal, the Lord, who's actually putting the conception into Eve for her to have Cain. But all in the interpretations, the serpent is blamed for it. Even so, there's this alternate portion, or someone who's working, it seems, covertly in concert with Yahweh, who gets blamed for the impregnation of Eve. And in the Genesis 6 chapter, there are all these sons of God described much like Enki did, having relations with their own descendants over and over again. And yet, the people who get blamed are, in part at least, just bystanders. The Nephilim were just there, and yet they're the ones who are scapegoated for all of it. So perhaps because of this scapegoating and the lack of recognition of the duality of the creation in Genesis, that the real culprits don't get named, and I think the central characters of the movie don't get identified.